rendering. Whoa! What happened? This is like that scene in Beetlejuice.
Well, hello.
Wow, that's zany. I love it. You know our greeting. Well, hello, and welcome back to Pencil to Pencil. Not pencil to pencil or I pencil. It's pencil to pencil. I and I. Your favorite pandemic podcast. Brought to you weekly at 8 p.m. by Mike Manley's Skull. Mike, what are you doing? I am JAMAR Nicholas. This is what they call us on the other side of the bridge, you guys. An author illustrator.
What?
But I'm
on the Rainbow Bridge?
That's what they call you in traditional publishing. I'm an author illustrator. But I'm also your favorite, well, maybe not your favorite. Mike's probably your favorite cartoonist. Cartoonist.
I'm nobody's favorite cartoonist.
Pshaw. I've sat next to Mike where somebody came up to you with like a Tupperware container full of Marvel cards for the 90s, and you signed like
sign my marbles.
Not your marbles, your Marvel cards, and they signed like you said like 1,000 of them, and I watched that happen. I am joined at the proverbial hip by my best buds in comicdom. You know him as the world heavyweight champion of webcomics. His name is Stone Cold Steve Conley. How are you, Steve Conley?
Fantastic. Author, illustrator, JAMAR Nicholas. As a hobo / malcontent, I'm doing just fine.
You need to have like all those little things like the military guys have. So like author, you get like a ribbon, illustrator, you get another author, illustrator, combined ribbon. Veteran ribbon.
That's right. At a couple of the book conferences, this is pretty big in book conferences world, not necessarily Comic Cons. They have, you have your lanyard, right? And usually the lanyards have 2 hooks instead of just like the 1 hook. And they have these stations near the registration booth where you can get these little ribbons, and you can add these little ribbons to your badge. And some of them might be like whatever group you're with, if you don't want to have like personal contact with people. And
give you a bag to pull over your head.
A paper bag to put over your head. And at one of them I was at, I didn't really know what I was picking, so I didn't pick a lot, but I picked one that said slow. And I put it on, and somebody was like, so does that have to do with something that maybe you don't want to discuss in public? And it said, no, what the thing said is that slow means if you're coming to like greet me, like you have to ask me before you touch me or shake my hand or something like that.
Should just be like, whoa.
Yeah, it should be like, whoa, horsey.
It's like hands out.
It should say slow your roll on it. That's what it should say.
Right.
All right, you're not getting out of this, Mike. I would be remiss if I did not introduce the maestro of mark making. I love that one. The full bird kernel of comics illustration. My bud and yours, Mike Manley. Hello, Mike Manley. How are you?
Hello, everyone. Hello.
Hello. Hello. We're going to jump right into it, you guys. I know that I'm glad that we're back here again. And before we get started, I have to say we had a fantastic guest last week, Joe Illage. Burned the house down, not literally. But, we had so many people coming up and saying, yo, Joe was fantastic. Yeah. When is he coming back? And, we've been saying this lately, we could easily do a part 2 to Joe.
For sure.
Do you guys want to maybe give a little nugget about last week? Anything you enjoyed about the conversation? Mike, what did you think about talking to Joe? How was that?
I just think it was interesting to, like, I never worked with Joe. And so he came on the Batman books after I left the Batman books, but it was sort of interesting to compare notes, business is very different, 30 years on, 40 years on. And, so it was sort of interesting to compare notes with someone who came in a little bit after I did, even though he's been in the business a long time. Just talking about how different the editorial structure is. and how because of the movies and how the corporate has basically taken over, the freedom that we had, the amazing freedom we had, and the openness we had in the business is basically gone now. At least, at the big two. Like I said in the podcast, you could go up, go around, see everybody. Before I went to Marvel the first time, I called every single Marvel editor on the phone. Every single Marvel editor picked up their telephone.
What?
To talk to this guy from Ann Arbor, Michigan, made an appointment with me so that when I drove out and went in with Blevins, I saw everyone and they all looked at my work. That would never happen in a million years now. That shows you how it's so different.
Would that have even happened by the time you stopped doing those books, Mike, or had it gotten more, I don't know, cloistered before?
I stopped doing monthly comics with like Shazam, I think 27. That's when I started doing the storyboards. But you could Marvel and DC were both in New York, and you could still go up and you could still go in and you could still see people. And Mike Carlin still answered his telephone. The people I worked with, this is before email had like taken over everything, and it was just a very, very, very different world. You don't really think about it until you think about it, about how different it is. Like now, you can't go up and just go in and see so and so, and then I'll walk down the hall and see so and so, or I'll see somebody in the bullpen, or part of it too is that because of the corporate structures, like you can't just like go up to the gate at Disney and like, yo, I want to go in and see the director. It's like they got a list. You're not on the list. Sorry, you can't get in.
Well, Mike, not that you should even be concerned about how people are kind of getting through the magic door nowadays, and also I can see that there are totally two different schisms happening when you were there into what's happening now. Do you think, can you even say, is it better now? Like, is it better now for somebody who doesn't live in New York?
No.
Right? Because we've even had on the old podcast, we would, as I call them, war stories, we would ask some of the guys about, tell me about when you went up to the offices, or like, was it, some of our other guests who said, oh, we drove from, Connecticut through the night to get there to, when they open the doors in the morning. But now you could live in Kentucky.
Well, you can live in Kentucky and you can talk to people, but I still think the old days was better because it was much more open. There was not all this like pressure resting on top of stuff. So you could go in as an unknown, like I was, right? See all these people and almost have a job the first day. And the only reason I didn't get a job that day is because I couldn't stay in New York. Right? If I'd been able to stay in New York, I would have had a job the first day, right? Because you could go around, you could see people. They were more open to see people. It wasn't like a closed shop. True, it's technology makes it easier for somebody in Japan to work with somebody in England, right? That part is good, but I don't think you have the opportunities at the major companies in the same way, because they also don't have the annuals. They don't have all those other books like, oh, you get to do an 8-page story, backup story in Sergeant Rock. Oh,
like Marvel Saga or something like that.
Yeah, no, there's it's just not like that now. So you have to go out and do the indie stuff, kind of build your name up, then you get in, right? Now you might get in at a higher level, but it's just it's walking a very very different path. And the editors that I worked with where people had been working for some of them since the 40s, right? So I benefited from working with someone who had worked with Joe Kubert and worked with Jack Kirby, and worked with Neil Adams, and worked with Stan Lee, and so I benefited from their experience. And it's much, much harder, as Joe said now, because each editor has like a zillion books. They may not even be familiar with your work at all,
right,
or anything like that. So you don't get the nurturing part of what editors used to do.
Let me ask one other thing on this topic, and then we'll kind of go into our thing, unless Steve had something he wanted to say. What about, and I've been seeing this starting to die out over the past 10 years. Beyond that whole like walking into the DC offices thing, is that you could meet editors at a comic book convention, and that has changed also. And I would hear, usually when you get to the show floor, you would hear the rumblings, oh, Marvel's not even here.
Right.
Or, oh, DC, they're not here. And that would just kind of change the mood with a lot of people, when you walked in the door with your ticket. So there was a thing in the past where you could like maybe make a meeting, or at least stop by the booth and talk to one of the editors that were standing around in a blazer, such as myself, and maybe bring some samples and drop things off. And from what I started to hear towards the end of that, either those guys weren't even coming, right? They don't, like, those dudes aren't showing up to take meetings, or that they'll say, you know what, just mail it or email me, and they don't even want to give you a card anymore. I think everything has shifted.
Well, yeah, it used to be, I would say probably up until 2014, I saw Marie Javins in Baltimore, and I picked up a job doing that, just international thing. And basically every convention I went to, especially Baltimore, because it's like more low key than like San Diego, where everybody's stressed out just trying to get a sandwich and get to the bathroom.
Yeah, and not in that order.
Right. Yeah. And every year I got work, either through an editor.
Who was Marie Javins? What was her title at the time?
Marie Javins she's not like the senior editor that she is now. Oh, I don't think so. Maybe she was higher up than, like, she's been, constantly moving up. I don't remember her exact title, but I met many an editor, or I would meet another, like Darwin Cook or somebody like that, and he would say, "Hey, you want to ink this Ant-Man job?" Right. That happened every year, but now they don't send the editors. The editors are not necessarily able to walk around and hand out work. Again, because of the corporate structure of the big two, big three. I don't know how it is at Image, because I've never worked for Image. I've inked stuff for like Rick Remender's stuff on Image, but I've never worked for Image. So I don't know if they have, like, it seems to me like you kind of pitch your stuff and they go, hey, but it used to be that Dark Horse, Marvel, and DC, you would get an editor, or you would meet another creator who's saying, hey, oh, you want to ink this? Or, hey, do you want to draw that? That doesn't happen now because of the nature. They have all these books, everything's all coordinated. You got 52 parts that all make one big story, and it's not as loosey-goosey as it used to be,
I would be interested to ask anybody who's watching live, who's you all right, Mike? Yeah, well, he muted himself. Yeah, take a minute. Who has any experience maybe going to a comic book con and doing a portfolio review? Like, Steve, did you ever do portfolio reviews at Comic Cons early on?
No. Sorry, Mike. I was hit the. No, I never really did that. I did bring copies of my books along. I was always self-publishing and writing my own stuff, and it was great to kind of bring a finished book around and just say, "This is what I was going to do." And this is how I met, like, early conversations with Paul Chadwick, and just the ability to walk up to these creators whose work I loved and talk shop with them. But it wasn't really about lining up work. The
Yeah.
first time I got a call from, say, DC Comics was an editor there who had read my webcomics. And so I mean, I definitely, the DC Comics work I got was because they were familiar with me from the web stuff. So, definitely a different way to go. I do want to get back to your question about Joe Illidge about last week, why I think people should absolutely go back and watch that episode. What I loved about it, the big thing for me was how often he came back to empathy and how he came back to real sensitivity for character. And that is huge. And I can see why, even as an intern, they would snap him up and at Milestone and get him fast tracked to, more involved. It seems like it's a wonderful perspective, and it's not something I hear a lot of people talk about, but empathy came up a lot, and it was great.
Yeah, no, it was a fantastic episode. And I asked Joe if we could maybe talk to him in the summer or something like that. So we're going to have him back. I guarantee it.
That's great.
So tonight, dear viewers, we have a really cool episode where we're in our series that we've been doing, kind of like workshopping through a particular bone in the comic book skeleton. And we have tasked Monsignor Manley to bless us with another lesson. So, Mike, what do you have on tap for tonight?
Well, I thought I would do lay out another couple pages again to show my thinking process, taking a script, and how I approach thinking and laying out a page, which is the most important part of doing a comic, is when you take the script and you turn it from a script into a visual narrative. And I was lucky enough when I asked a couple weeks ago for some scripts. Dan Chichester sent me two. The first one we worked on a couple weeks ago was the Daredevil script, and then he sent me a Judge Dredd script. And so that's the one we're going to work on tonight. And this one is a full script, unlike the Marvel one, which was a plot. So when you deal with a full script, you still have freedom to rearrange things, but the writer is much more in charge of the pacing, let's say, with a full script than a Marvel plot, because a Marvel plot may suggest panels, but it's not as specific. And in this case, with the script we have tonight, you have all the narration and the dialogue and the sound effects. So right from the beginning, you have to consider the real estate, the sharing of the space, where you're going to put the balloons, who's speaking first, all those formal aspects of laying out a comic book page, which are much more open when you're working from a plot. Because in a comic, the person who speaks first is always on the left side of the panel, right? And then the next person, so you sort of arrange it that way, and you have to put the balloons in first. Which is how I work when I work on The Phantom and Judge Parker, because they're both full scripts. The first thing I do is I take the script and basically paste the word balloons, the copy in, especially like when I'm working in Clip Studio. If I'm drawing on paper, I actually roughly pencil out the the copy, right? Then I know, okay, this is the rest of this area. This is where I can draw. One of the big mistakes a lot of people make in the beginning, and I did too, everybody does, is not leaving enough room for the word balloon, because you don't want things to be cramped. You want things to be aesthetically pleasing. So when somebody reads something, right, we read the balloons when we look at the art. We read the balloons when we look at the art. If it's hard to read it. It becomes difficult to read it. It makes it harder for the viewer to enjoy the process. And what happens is it's sort of like it would be like you're listening to a record, but you got to scratch a earphone. You know, it's just not. It's not. It's sort of annoying, right? And what happens when I would teach a class, you know, most people love to draw. Most people do not love to letter, right?
Oh, that's a whole other thing. Yeah.
Right. And some of my students who were the most prolific drawers and really made a lot of pages usually also were like the worst letterers, right? And so, you know, you explain how to, you know, put the guidelines because, you know, you want to be able to read balloon, you want a nice space around the lettering, you don't want it crunching and all those kinds of things, all those sort of formal things. So,
Hey, Mike, just to cut you off real quick, have you seen that one meme where it's Anakin and Padme and they're like kind of having an exchange and people just fill in their own words? So the one panel is Anakin like, I'm done. I turned in my art, my comic book. And then Padme goes, did you leave room for the lettering? And then the next panel is just like,
right.
Sorry, go ahead.
So the way I try to introduce everybody to doing comics is, and this can work even in the case of what we are doing tonight, is to just get an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, you know, and just draw a 6-panel grid, right? And then what I would have the student do is write in their copy, right? And so if you write in your copy, I said, even if you change it later, because everybody knows, oh, it's not, you know, they're worrying about the if it's the right story. Write it. You can always change it later, but you need to know what you got to draw and how many panels, et cetera, et cetera. And this is sort of like the easiest way to start, because then you can just draw like a stick person, 2 stick people talking, right? Just to break down how many panels, who is talking, what you have to draw. It can be the crudest drawing, just a placeholder to understand what's going on, right? And a lot of people are sort of resistant to that. And so the worst case would be that you do this beautiful drawing and like, oh, well, now I have to cut off this guy's head, or I have to cover up that really cool explosion that I drew. And so the first stage is placing the lettering, which again, you're of course free to move around, right? And it's sort of like, you know, you don't build a house by starting with the doorknob and then attach it to the door and attach it to the frame and then, you know, make a wall and then you walk around with this wall and like, oh, I guess I'll put the wall here, you know. I'm like, oh no, I need to move that wall over now. Oh, I broke the door.
It sounds like my Sims game.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So why don't you guys chatter for a second? I'll get things set up here.
Sure. You know, I think that's one of the early fog of war about cartooning is that you kind of like, if you read a lot of comics, you read a lot of comic strips, you kind of have all this stuff figured out, and you finally get to the point where you have a pencil and a piece of paper and a ruler, and you're like, holy shit, I have no idea how this stuff works. Right. And one of my, I can't reach it, but one of my favorite books that I got when I was way too young, my mother gave me this book, I was 9 or something. I think it's the Professional's Guide to Cartooning by Ken Muse. Mike and I used to commiserate over this book. This is giant oversized book. And Ken Muse was a cartoonist, and also he did a lot of work on like the Tom and Jerry cartoons, and he was like one of those like journeyman cartoonists. He's almost like when like people would sell gags out of their attaché case. They go door to door to offices. Hey, you need some jokes? He was like one of those dudes, and he wrote this really fantastic book. I think it's out of print, but you can still find it, about how this stuff works, like how reducing a comic, a cartooning page, like tightens up the art, or you know what I mean. And here's the reduction grid from big to small, and what twice up means. Like all the hieroglyphics of comics were in this book. Well, he spent a chapter just on lettering and how the Ames guide works. And if you've never heard of an Ames lettering guide, they still sell them. You can get one at Staples. There's probably like 40 of them in the clearance section. Nobody uses them. And just how important it is to kind of like, hear the steps. The first thing you do is you lay out your lettering grid at the top of your page, and then then you make space for the word balloons in the dialogue. Then you do the art,
right?
Rather than the reverse. So you never come into that, into those bugaboos.
Right. And basically the older generation, the generation before my generation, or the generation 2 before my generation, almost all those guys could letter. They could all letter. That was all part of the job, was especially comic strip people, and there were a few guys that went around and lettered a bunch of strips at one time, would drive around in Connecticut, and pick up strips from a bunch of different cartoonists, go home, go back, letter them. And each artist sort of had a slight, like Walt Kelly had a style of lettering, which was different than Milton Caniff's style of lettering, which was different than Alex Raymond's style of lettering. So everybody also had a style of lettering. And that was just part of the craftsmanship of doing the job. Then in comic books, it became less that, because you tended to you'd send in your pages, or they would be lettered in the bullpen. They had staff letterers, things like that. And then by the time I got in, I've never lettered, anything that I did for Marvel or DC. I mean, I would letter signs or whatever. But that was just part of like the job, was lettering, So
I'm sorry, Mike. I keep jumping in your face all night. I apologize. It just made me think of in early webcomics and self-publishing, when suddenly you started to see comic style fonts appear in the marketplace. Like our favorite Comic Sans. And Whiz Bang was my early font. Did you remember Whiz Bang? And I think I was paying the dude money, because he was like, if you want to use my font, he sent you a floppy disk with the font on it. Yeah. But I have a really bad joke. I probably told this one. You ready? Comic Sans walks into a bar. The bartender says, "Get out of here. We don't serve your type."
Have you seen that,
ladies and gentlemen?
If you've seen that, Shelley, Wild Worlds. Yeah. There's that, of course, that Papyrus Saturday Night Live bit, which is the greatest thing in the world. But of course, the stinger is that it ends with just it's in Comic Sans. That's just for all of us. Just a little parting hit in the heart. It's excellent.
But yeah, somebody somewhere hated Comic Sans, and it's now a design joke. But you had to start somewhere. And actually, coming up later is I'm trying to get some letterers on the show, which I think would be a really great conversation. I'm sorry, Mike. Continue.
No. I mean, I think it's a really important part of the art, right? You can't. I mean, I frankly miss the art, the lettering, and everything being on the board, right? Now, because I'm doing it myself on the strips, I totally control where it all goes, and if I need to move something or address something or rearrange something, And those old letterers were so good at saying, "Oh, okay, well, I'm gonna," you know, they knew how to make all those little adjustments to make the art look nice, to make you like even the shape of your balloon. If every time the balloon is like a different shape and it's kind of lopsided and weird. Now maybe that's you're doing a weird strip, you're doing a crazy strip, and maybe that actually contributes to the feel. Like, if you remember reading Swamp Thing, he thought, and it had that kind of jaggy word, right? So all that stuff, like the shape of the word balloon, the shape of the lettering, the you could do so many great things with lettering to contribute to the whole effect of reading a comic. And I think because one of the casualties, in a way, is that you can sort of start out and not be really aware of that stuff, and then you learn your craft, the craft of that afterwards. Like a lot of people they will never have a page with lettering on it.
It's weird with the computer stuff. Actually added a whole bunch of, not only was, well, there was always going to be not necessarily great lettering, some rough lettering, but lifeless lettering is what the fonts really brought, where very geometric, perfect ovals and razor sharp pointers. And it's so lifeless and so not hand done the way the art is. There's a shocking contrast with some lettering, and I love when it feels integrated. I always said that about Jamar's work, is that there's that Eisnerian quality of, you got the sense that the part of your brain that's lettering is the same part of your brain that's drawing, whereas for me it's very much compartmentalized. I'm either doing this or I'm doing that, and I feel like sometimes a page or a team can really be integrated or coordinated in a way that make the whole thing better.
So when you think, this is for both of you guys, when you think of a page, do you think of the lettering being on the page, or you just think of the art?
Steve?
Oh, for me, lettering is on the page. Since doing the Middle Age, everything it's got to be balanced. It's got to feel right. Can't feel cramped. I'm even a big fan of having the word balloons be a little airy, like not tight. It has to have space to breathe. I like having everything, I want the tails, the pointers of the balloons to indicate the emotion. Like if a person's warbly, if they're just chatting, it's so softer. But if it's saying something urgent, it's a much more direct balloon. And all that, it's all contributes to the feel. I mean, you put all that thought into how the hands are drawn and the facial expressions. It feels like the balloon should at least have, since it's so much easier to do, it should at least be as thoughtful as the rest of the thing.
When you think of your page, do you just see it as a drawing, or do you see it in your head with the balloons? Does that?
I think I see it with the balloons. It's something I have to think about that. I know that when I'm drawing, because I don't have the lettering or anything down when I'm doing the pages, but I always leave room for balloons. Like you kind of put like dummy space in the panel, or like maybe you'll have your character, but you'll move them over to the right just to give space for the word balloon. So I'm thinking about it. I don't necessarily visualize the word balloon in my head.
Yeah, because I think the longer I do this, the more I think of the whole, the lettering, where the lettering is going to go and how the lettering is going to flow through the background, all that. In the beginning, I just sort of thought of the image, right? And it's like the lettering was like, oh, well, I'll stick it in there. But now I'm really aware of the fact that's a real important part of laying out a page, and you can do a lot just by where you place the narration, and how much narration, and sometimes there is a conflict between how much writing and how much drawing. Like if you write, it's a dark and stormy night, and then you draw, it's a dark and stormy night. Do you need to say that it's a dark and stormy night, or can that art carry it?
Right. Isn't that an old superhero comic trope? Like, Superman flies to the sea, and he's flying to the sea.
Right. Right.
The Ted Knight voice. Yeah.
It always seemed like the writer had no confidence that the artist was going to be able to let people know what was happening. Like, I need to put this in here so we're sure that they're flying. No matter what the drawing comes out like, it'll be clear.
Yeah. I mean, there's different philosophies. Again, when you start dissecting it, there's different philosophies, because I would say that DC was more conservative, and so they would write, "It's a dark and stormy night," or Superman.
Also part of the full script process, right? I mean,
yeah, and I think everything was much more spelled out, and with the Marvel method, it was much more open, and so the writer was open to interpreting the drawing and saying, well, the drawing carries it. I can have Spider-Man think about all this stuff.
Right.
I don't have to say Spider-Man swings through the city searching for the Vulture, because we see it.
Right.
So you get to have that interior dialogue that, especially in strips like Spider-Man, allowed that whole other side of the character to be developed,
That was one of my favorite sequences in a recent The Middle Age, where I basically had a lot of exposition I had to dump on the reader, and it was like 3 episodes, and so the characters are just talking about all this exposition, and they're fighting monsters, and they're not talking about what they're doing at all. The subject of the monsters never comes up. It's just they're running, the monsters are there, and all this exposition is being laid on top of this fight scene. And it's completely, they could have been doing anything. They could have been bowling. They could have been swimming. It didn't really matter what they were doing, because the exposition was going to happen anyway. But I love that you can do that. You don't have to say what's going on, or you can talk about all the other things, the sense of smell, the sounds, all the stuff that the pictures can't do.
Right. And I think it's easier when you are doing it all yourself.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. And it becomes easier when you work with someone for a long time, because you know when to hand things off. So I think, going on 7 years now on the Phantom, Tony knows where to hand off to me, where he didn't in the beginning, right? He was writing, the first story I worked on was actually written for Paul Ryan, who passed away. So when Tony was writing that, he was writing it for a different artist, right? And then I picked it up, ball up, and I was looking at what Paul had done, and sort of like trying to finish it in a Paul Ryan way, which I now, I just do my own thing, and I think because of the nature of our working together, Tony knows what to lean on me for, and I know where to leave room for his exposition. The last couple of weeks, there was more exposition. The previous weeks, there was more action. There's a lot of fighting and gunplay and everything. But the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot more narration. So if you want to bring, in fact, this will be a good way to go into it. So if you bring up my screen.
You want to get it, Susan?
Sure.
So this is Dan Chichester's script. This is for Judge Dredd. And so you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 panels on the first page, right? And you can see the panel descriptions. You got all the dialogue and a description of what is in each panel, right? Now, so the first thing I do, as I did previously, the first thing you do when you get a script is you read it through, and you might have to read it through 2, 3, 4 times, right? And in this case, since it's Judge Dredd, I downloaded some images of Judge Dredd, and then I did a little sketch of the monster that's in this story. So when I read it, I start thinking like, okay, there's four panels. And there's 5 panels, close-ups on a video screen. Videos, 2 of them are close-up on video screens. There's an establishing shot. We start with a close-up on a character, the huckster guy, and then you have the second panel is an establishing shot because you show where he's standing, like this old beat up kind of like old newsstand place. So you start in close on the character, and then you reveal in the second panel, you reveal where he is, right? And then you go back in closer and closer and closer on the as we go to the 3rd to the 5th panel, because you see him getting out the game system, and then you see him looking at the screen. That's what I'm dealing with. And then I start thinking, okay, I might have do some sketches of the character of the, I did one of the alien. I might do a sketch of the guy, the huckster guy. I may actually look at actors. I do that quite a bit now, especially having done comic strips for the last, like 13, 14 years. And it's something I learned from Al Williamson, is he would cast his characters. And I think I talked about this before. So he would either cast himself as the hero, or he would get neighbors to play characters, take photos of them. He would use old Hollywood actors, or he had just like a huge stack of these old photoromanzos, which were basically black and white photo comics. So I have some. They're really awesome to have because they're basically like looking at a movie, and you have all the characters that are laid out like a comic book. So you've got all the great like talking head shots, and this guy from the front, same character from the back, same character from the side, 3/4 front, 3/4 back. So he would use that. He would lay out his page, and then he would say, "Oh, I like this guy," and he would, so he had this amazing way of combining his drawing over he would lay it out, then he would have his drawing, and then he would take photos for reference, and then he would find what they would call swipe from the photoromancer. So he would combine all that to do the strip. And most of the realistic comic strip artists, Stan Drake, Leonard Starr, Alex Raymond, all those guys used photos. Stan Drake was very famous for being one of the first guys to use the Polaroid camera when they came out. So he could get these more casual shots and use those as reference for his characters. And that added a level of believability. You know, you might get stuck with pose, and the model might do something. And go, oh yeah, I like that. That looks great. Generally, in comics, you don't have as much time or budget, but if you get, you know, if you're stuck for a character, like I may have to draw this huckster guy, I kind of run through my head like old movie actors, or maybe he's like that guy that was in that episode of Gunsmoke, or that guy that was in you know, like David Warner, who just passed away, you know, who was in like a million movies, usually as like a bad guy or a heavy. So it helps to start thinking of the character as a real person, because then it helps you act the person. That's another big thing, is the characters have to be able to act. And if you don't have a feeling for the character, it's hard to make them act. It's hard to make them emote. You sort of, like, you might be able to do a drawing, but it might be a little blah, you know. So let's so I'm gonna stop sharing that, and then I'm gonna my page set up. So are there any questions?
Yeah, we got a couple, but as we're getting this next bit set up, if you are watching on YouTube, be sure to hit the subscribe button. We are very, very close to 1,000 subscribers over on YouTube. So if you're over there, please click that button, hit the like button as well, and ring that notification bell. We got a question here from James. Mike, when you're planning your dialogue word balloons digitally, how do you determine the appropriate size for reading, especially if it will be printed?
Well, I think, you know, what's going to be hard for tonight is I have that was a PDF that Dan sent, which is basically photos of his script. So I can't copy and paste like I would do it. So I try to work at my layouts at original comic book size. So you just look at a comic book and you go, oh, okay, that's how big the lettering is. And you try to more or less make your lettering that size, you know. And because I've been working with Clip Studio, which is great, I can just copy, for instance, like on the Phantom strips, I can copy Tony's copy, put it right in, just paste it right in. And so no problem. And I already have like the size, everything's preset. The size of the strip, I have a dummy master, and the font is Comic BB8 14 point. And so that's preset in Clip Studio. So whenever I cut the copy from the script, just paste it right in. Then I know how big it is, right? The only thing that might change is if I make something bold. Sometimes you might make the lettering a little bit louder, bigger if somebody's yelling. And then, you know, the maybe the most creative would be the sound effects.
Right. Yeah, I worked back from print as well for doing webcomics. I made a template, I printed it out, got the fonts the right size, and I've been using that template ever since. So I started with a print example. I didn't try to guess, and you know, I basically just started in created the template in Photoshop and then brought that over into Procreate, and that let me know I was making everything the right size. But I do the same thing, leave room for it to be larger if they're yelling, smaller if they're being quiet.
Right. So thinking about on the script, is this being shared now?
Nope, not yet.
Okay.
And there was another question we had from JRD on YouTube.
Yeah.
Mike, would you keep sketches or reference photos from projects where with certain writers in case they bring the characters back in later books, or would you just rely on your collection of the old books of monthlies?
Do I what? Do I
Do you keep the sketches and reference photos in projects? Let's
Yes.
say you have a supporting character and you bring it back just on the off chance he's going to come back 4 years from now.
I have thousands of things of images. So, like for Judge Parker, I think we mentioned earlier that I based the characters on actors. I was sort of drawing sort of an Ed Barretto style in the beginning because that's what they wanted. And then I slowly morphed into my style. But again, I thought, well, it's sort of like an old soap opera like Dallas or, As the World Turns. And so it really helped to make them a little bit more distinct and not as generic if I made them an actor or an actress. And so, yes, I have a zillion photos of just the recent character, Detective Yelich. I decided years ago when I first drew him to base him on James Franciscus for some reason. And so that's what I did. And I have photos, old photos, and then new stuff based of James Franciscus. So yeah, I always save stuff like that. I mean, you really have to on a strip like this. That was a hard part in the beginning because, basically what I had to have King Features do was send me all of Barretto's art on a couple of discs, because when I was drawing the characters, he might suddenly do, these were characters that he had drawn that I'd never seen.
Right.
So I needed to have reference. And then the more reference I had, the better, because Barretto was not always consistent with some of the characters. And I think that may have been because he was having somebody else maybe lay part of it out and then he was inking it. But so you'd look at like 30 heads of Randy and go, okay. He's got kind of like this bumpy little stub at the end of his nose, which seemed to more or less be consistent. So I had to sort of do my version. You're trying to, again, it's like playing, I always say it's like playing a role on Broadway. If you're playing King Lear or you're playing The King and I, the role that Yul Brynner played for bazillions of years, that's into people's, maybe sometimes you do a new version and nobody cares, but people who read comic books and comic strips really care about stuff like that, and they will tell you, I don't know. So, so just to sort of start out, I know that I had a close-up of the character talking, right? And then I had the establishing shot, and then I had three other panels. So you guys can't see it here, but I'm bringing up my script, and I'm looking at how much copy there is. And so there's two, I would say, medium-sized balloons of copy in the first panel. So what I would do is I would just roughly put in a couple of balloons. The other thing is you can also move a balloon through a transition through a panel. It doesn't have to be contained within the panel. So let's say I just going to make a panel. Is this showing up? You guys can see it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm thinking like, here's the first panel. Here's the second panel. Now, if this is a bleed book, in other words, the art bleeds off the page, I may be able to bleed this and have this set in a little bit. So this would bleed. So I could actually, it's almost like an inset. I might be able to float that over. I sort of like that. And again, you know, I can adjust the size of this. But again, this is how I think. This is my thinking process, right? And this is a little abbreviated because we're pressed for time. So I got my 2 balloons in there. And then in the second panel, the bigger panel, which is sort of the establishing shot, there's 2 more balloons. So right now, I'm going to sort of just indicate the space for those balloons. Third panel is a close-up of the video game system, and the screen blips to life. Oh, so the second panel is camera pulls back slightly to show Huckster standing in front of a ravaged new style shop constructed out of salvaged bits of wood and metal, and a lone outpost on the blasted landscape heaped on the stand's catty-cornered shelves, and hanging from its numerous hooks are all manner of goods and dubious value, dead, mutated animals, broken bits of technology, etc., etc., etc. So this guy's
thankfully, you have that picture in your swipe file.
Right.
Blasted landscape sounds like my high school dating career.
Right. So this is also the character is addressing us, right? The huckster is coming in and he's addressing us,
like
almost
breaking the fourth wall, right, Mike?
Right. Yeah, he's breaking the fourth wall. He's addressing us, and it almost makes me think of like a Mad Magazine, because there is sort of a Mad Magazine aspect to the Judge Dredd stuff, because it's sort of humorous and over the top, you know. So and this guy's wearing like a top hat and a bunch of raggedy old clothes, right? So if I'm thinking, you know, here's this guy, I'm thinking maybe he's peering in, like, and maybe, and he's got like, you know, some kind of a top hat. So I'm just, this is a first rough thing. So maybe he's like,
oh, he's doing a milady.
yeah, right? Like at top of the morning, right? Right. Rather than something static, something with a little, you know, at top of the morning, you know, and again, when I draw these characters, I try to inhabit like an actor. I try to feel the pose in my body when I draw it. And that helps me get a better gesture. If I feel it in my body, I can communicate it better in a drawing. Very much like an animator. And I when I teach, a lot of times, you know, students will have a problem with a pose. And I would tell them to get up and pose it out. And, you know, sometimes, you know, there's a fair amount of people who are self-conscious about that. And whenever I see somebody who's struggling with a pose, I can always tell that they're not feeling it themselves, because you can tell somebody will have a good gesture but may have an anatomical problem or foreshortening problem. But if you have the gesture, that's the most important aspect. But if you don't feel the gesture, you don't feel that in yourself and your body, it's really hard to get that down on paper. So
I really like that leaning in to the panel, Mike.
Right. So again, I'm just thinking of like shape, right? And now this leans in, this goes in. So maybe and this is like the twisted burning earth, right? So he's got all those canyons and everything. So I start thinking, okay, maybe this place has got tarps, and he's inviting you into his shop, right?
See my hat, vampire bat.
Right. Now I might say, well, maybe this is too big.
Mm.
All right, maybe I can reduce this down.
So, Mike, when you see those kind of like visual things, like is it just all gut that makes you go, nah, you know what? Maybe I need to move this around, or is there kind of like mental geometry going on in your head?
Well, basically, what I did is I had these ideas, right, and then you start to test the idea,
Yeah.
right? Because basically, what I want more room to show this background,
Mm-hmm.
right? More room to show this background. And so I might be thinking that there's something in the foreground. Maybe there's like weird, and they were said like skulls and stuff. So maybe there's like some weird beast skull thing here. Maybe there's a pole goes across and could have stuff hanging on it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there we go. Maybe like a truck tire. This guy's got everything, So this is sort of like a dilapidated barn, maybe. And so I can get that mesas in there. It's cramped, but you got room.
Mm-hmm.
So I think of the environment. In this case, I'm thinking of the environment first. All right. Because if I start thinking about the guy, the character, but I don't fit in the environment, he won't fit into the environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe these are boots. So I'm just thinking, I just draw shapes and then I can turn those things into specific things later. Now, now I have the guy.
I just had this thought about getting your apocalyptic top hat with steampunk goggles at the Goggles and Top Hat Bazaar.
There you go.
In your hellish landscape. So, Mike, I have a question, and I miss this, Mike. I miss us. I miss this. I usually, when we did these things back in the day, I would always play the layman and ask you these kind of like basic questions. I've always heard these kind of like comic book pro war story tips about like you in every page you should always have a full character. Like you shouldn't, if you have a page that has nothing but talking heads and no feet, then that's not visually interesting. Do you agree with that?
I don't think there's any rule for page per page. I think it's all really depends upon what it is that you're having to draw.
Okay.
Right?
Hmm. So you don't necessarily agree that you always have to have feet in everyone in at least one of the panels in a page.
Well, you know, it might be a page where you have nothing but feet walking, or it might be a page where you have, you
You're
know,
gonna trigger somebody talking about stuff like that.
it's
Mhm.
all dependent upon the story. It's all dependent upon the story. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm just sort of doing a quick gesture to this guy. Uh, maybe he's a little bit, move him up a little bit. Okay. All right. So there's the guy, and there's going to be a video game back there. So maybe I'm thinking, some kind of
Sega Apocalypse.
right.
Nintendo Death Cube. Death Rattle. Oh, I like that. I hope you guys don't mind me asking questions and kind of making mirth while we're doing this. Steve, when you're working on pages, do you kind of like do really detailed kind of like discovery sketches, or do you just kind of like jump right into it? How do you normally work on middle age?
Well, the format of it is fairly locked down, so I don't have to think about it that much. Without having to think about the panels shapes too
Mhm.
much. That kind of frees up. That puts me in a box that makes my life a little bit easier. Um, but I do a lot of sketches. But to me, the main rule I try to do is just vary uh, figure sizes. I don't want to have. I not that there's a rule against it, but I try not to have two heads that are the same size in two different
Mm.
panels. Sort of like if you're going to have basically every page of the Middle Age is like you won't see on the same page unless there's a reason why, like a person gets hit with a tomato, and then the next panel they're in the exact same position, exact same pose, because you're kind of showing the before and after. So those
Gotcha.
having that consistent size from panel to panel makes sense. But trying to vary up the layouts so that it's interesting to look at. I find it just way more interesting to look at if you've got things of various sizes. And so I don't go to this. I don't think I go to this level of detail. I love how Mike is able to kind of improvise a fully standing figure without,
It,
15 stick figures.
that's a really detailed image, Mike. I really love that.
And how about you? How about with Leon? What's the approach in that case?
I think I have a couple of the things that you were talking about, Steve. Like I try not to have characters be the same exact size from panel to panel. And I think I probably spend probably more time than I need to thinking about the layouts. Like I kind of am not against. I try not to use 6 panel grids if I can not do it. And also doing like these kids graphic novels, I feel like I don't need to do 6 panels because that's a little too much information.
Right.
So I kind of default on 3 or 4 a page.
Right.
So that changes my whole storytelling style right there. Go ahead, Mike. So what's happening next? You're laying out the bottom of the page.
Right. Yeah. So I'm just reading the script. Third panel is a close up of the video game system. The screen blips to life, displaying a savage-looking mutant software logo, which flickers in static. Huckster's hands are on the edge of the panel, manipulating a game joystick that's held together with duct tape and thick alligator clips. So,
Okay.
I'm looking at how much. Okay, so
Kind of like how much real estate you have to do that.
Yeah, I'm gonna place in the word balloon.
Well, with some of the educational comics I do, I'm working with a lot of people who've never written for comics before. And sometimes you see stuff like that. The blips to life inside a single panel is not something that you really can show.
Right.
You know, unless you're doing like web comics or with a little bit of animation or something. So it's interesting that that's in there, because that's like, how do you I'm interested to see what, Mike, how are you imagining that you would show something blip to life? It's just there, right? Would you put a glow around it or something to say with the word blip? Little sound effect.
Let's see, I'm just figuring out, you know, like he's holding.
Oh, I love that icon, Tim.
Hello, Tim Fielder. Tim is a great comment. Tim always brings the heat to pencil. So thanks for joining in. I love our discourse. I talk like that when I have my jacket on.
The blazer of discourse.
That's right. +1 to my constitution.
Mutant software. So I'm thinking like the old, almost like Space Invader.
Yeah.
But again, you know, I'm just trying to put the stuff in here so I can.
Nope. Amateur faux pas. I apologize, gents.
Come on, Conley.
I know. That's it.
What do we pay you for?
Cut his mic.
That's right. Cut his mic. Hook him. He's out of here.
Okay, so panel 4 is close-up of the screen as it shows a computer graphic of an insectivore. This is the stylized close-up of an image of a fearsome insectivore. He might appear in a computer game. Sections of his body are derezzed into wireframe outline to drive home the point that it's a computer game. And then he's using both of his hands to hold one of his egg sacs above his head, the translucent sac pulsating with a fierce insect inside. Okay, so
that old chestnut.
And then
he's drawing one of those. If you had a nickel for every time you had to draw that, Mike.
All right. So yeah, there's 2 word balloons. So you don't have a lot of room in these little panels here.
Yeah.
So what I might have to do is I might have to take this and reduce it down a little bit. Still has the impact that I want. Again, this is really important. This is where we rob Peter to pay Paul, as we say, right? Because I may need these. I may need these to be bigger, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I may need these to be taller. Right? If they're taller, it gives me a little bit more room, and I don't feel that they're so cramped.
Mm-hmm.
So here is the I'm still thinking, this he's looking at an image on a screen. So, probably what I would do is I would come up with one drawing and then I would repeat
Mm-hmm.
the same image. So there's like and in fact, let me show, well, I'll show this later anyway. I had designed a little alien. I'll show that, but so sort of like a big cockroach thing. And there would be his sack.
Don't mind me, I'm 12 years old.
There's his glandular sac.
Wow. Mike, let me ask you a question. So how much are you thinking about how much detail you're putting in the thumbs to give you information to tell your story, but also are you ever considering having to trace them up when you're going to go to the next step of tightening in the work?
Yeah. Now, what I do with this, right, is I could lighten it up, go over it, and draw it. I could draw it in Clip Studio. No, what I did the last time was I showed you the dark and how I like it. I'm getting a real big.
Yeah, I don't know where that's coming from. Hello?
Yep.
All right, Mike, try to talk now.
How's that? Better?
Yeah, that's better.
So I got one final panel. Close up of the video game screen showing a computer graphic similar in the style the previous Jeff and grid pattern, along with two other aviators and a 3/4 angle of the heavily armed mutants, and then a large billboard. They're standing before a billboard of the mega city. So it's like another shot. So another shot of the screen. And there's also two balloons. I would say, again, medium size, right? So it's all about saving space. If I have to make this smaller to have enough room to show what I need to have to show here, that's what I do, right? Because that's the most important thing. So again, if this is a screen,
and Mike, maybe we should end on this page.
oh, okay.
Since we're kissing 9:30.
Okay, well, we're done then. I would probably have if there was a mutant.
And this is a great question to ask now that you're kind of ending this page. So kind of like zooming out on everything you've done, and I know you've already made your preliminary idea of how this is going to work. And kind of looking at it now, would you consider totally Tetrising this and pulling it apart and reconfiguring it? Or would you just redraw things if you don't think you give them enough space once you're done? Like, what's your thought process at the end of this page?
So like a Space Invader thing, right? And maybe put this on a grid. So these characters would be on a grid. In the mega city would be on a grid, and, and you would have the so they look like they're rezzing up.
Mm-hmm. Would you put color notes or anything like that in it for whoever's going to look at it next? Like, this is going to be a wireframe. Would you do things like that?
No.
No.
I mean, they would hopefully see they would hopefully see they would get the script, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if they got the script, then they should.
Does anybody have any questions for Mike, Steve, or myself, or this demo before we start wrapping up? I think this is always fantastic, and just watching the thought process play out in front of us is always amazing. Oh, I like the tooth. That's nice.
David Letterman as the huckster.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get the feeling at this point, because the drawing is in service of this. So,
Steve, you want to ask that?
Yeah, question from Dom Gomez on YouTube. Mike, do you ever spot the blacks in the layout stage?
Oh yeah, if it occurs to me, or I feel like it's a big part of the panel or the effect or the mood, yeah,
And a question from Tim Fielder on YouTube: why the red and blue colors, Mike? I know you talked about this before, but what you seem to jump around. Does your brain to hand coordination work differently based on the color?
Nope. I just like if I start out with the red and I just get my shapes in there, and then I can refine stuff. It's all about refining, right? It's sort of like it's easier to refine, to draw over.
Are these on separate layers, or are these all on a single layer?
This is all on one layer.
Mm-hmm.
Right. This is all on one layer.
I'd end up with like 15 different layers for all of this.
Well, it's funny. We were just talking about this. I just did a school visit, and kids were asking about layers. As these kids are so advanced, they all work in Procreate now. This is a great school, and they were like, "How come you only work in 3 layers? Like I have like 1,000 layers on mine." And I think at some point, beyond just doing the paperwork of keeping track of all those things, like why are you doing so many layers? You know what I mean?
Yeah, for me, the whole point is to make this process as simple as possible, right? Make this all as simple as possible.
Just speaking for myself, it's the uncertainty and cowardice. That's why I have all those layers. I want to keep it back up. What if I mess it up? It's always,
wow. Yeah, I usually have 3 layers. I have a rough. If I'm going over my thumbs, I have the thumbs, the rough, a tight, and the inks, and that's it.
Nice.
That's it.
Right.
But yeah, go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
So, like, I may think, okay, this is maybe in here. this is all black, right? So I might be thinking that this is all black, and we're framing
Mm-hmm.
the video machine, right?
Right. Yeah, that's really smart. So you're giving a viewer a visual arrow, like I mean, almost like a visual, kind of like
This, all
plot-
kinds of stuff
plot point,
here,
yeah.
yeah, but yeah. So there we go, right? And then whatever weird shrunken heads, whatever thing hanging down.
Guys who are watching us live, tell us what you think of this session. Tell us if you enjoy these live demos. I know I think the head, heart, and hand of Mike Manley to bless us with this stuff.
I'm going to show you one more thing.
Sure.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yep.
See if you want to get it.
Got it.
Okay. So when I was thinking of like the video game might be like, I was thinking like the old Space Invader, just to make it very
Mm-hmm.
kind of cheesy, And so I was thinking of the Alien. So I did this real quick thing of the Alien, with the Alien, and then I was thinking like you'd be holding an egg. So I just did this. This is an idea sketch. I may do 5 more until I get the Alien the way that I like, and then I might do a drawing of the Alien with, and then I got my reference of
Mm-hmm.
Judge Dredd. But I might do another sketch of the Alien with Dredd to figure out how tall Dredd is. Is he taller than Dredd?
Mm-hmm.
And I might do 10 of these aliens. That one I just did in like 10 minutes. Just drew some shapes. So I go, okay, that's okay. But maybe I wanted to be a little bit creepier, or maybe I don't, maybe I wanted to be taller, and so I always say these drawings are like clay. You have to get something down to either agree or disagree with it, right? Because it's in your head. Anything in your head is nebulous. It looks good in your head because it's like a dream, the edges are diffused. When you actually turn it into a drawing, a concrete drawing, then you can say, well, okay, maybe I like the head. I don't like the body, or maybe I like the shoulders, but the face needs to be simpler, or the face needs to be scarier, or the jaws need to be bigger. But you got to put it down first, just like I did with the layout. You got to so that's my first layout, right?
Excellent.
Now I may revise that 2 or 3 times, but I can't revise it until I get it out of my head down on paper. Then I can say, okay, maybe do I do a slight down shot? A slight up shot. One of the things that I know about, go back to one of the things I know about presentation and the camera angle. If you're low, it makes the person more important. If you're below horizon, so I'm below his waist, that makes him more important. That also allows me to get an angle, a frame. Right? I'm thinking about everything in here. Right? This is sort of interesting, right? I'm framing him. So I'm not going to be able to get that much of the background, maybe just a little bit, you know, because there's a lot to do on this. If I make him small, or if I make it too small, then this is what I call a medium establishing shot. You know, a true establishing shot would be further back. You know, like another 50 feet back, then you would see the whole building, right? And you would see all the background, right? But because we're in close with him to start, and then we're seeing his shed, right, with his stuff in it, there's a lot on this page.
Yeah,
There's a lot on this page. By making these 3 panels the same, we concentrate on what's on the screen.
mm-hmm.
We concentrate by what's on the screen.
We got a question here from YouTube. Mr. Matt Moringo says, Mike, this was great. Do you find it tough to keep the liveliness of your layouts in the final? He says, my stuff always stiffens up when I go to final.
Yeah. It's, I mean, everybody faces that. There's that beauty that's in a sketch that is always lost when the only guy I know who's really good at that, really, to me, like the best at it was Kirby, because his drawings were like tight sketches, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he drew right on the page. So he didn't do any layout. He laid that baby right on the page. It was like, bam, right from his brain, down his arm, pow, right on paper. Kubert was able to keep the energy of his sketches. And I think some of those old school guys who were more cartoony were able to do it. They were able to keep the energy, you know. So that is just what I call a thinking layout, right? Now I may go and I may refine that, but the first thing I have to do is tell Dan's story. I can't take out Dan's copy. I can move his copy around, but I can't take it out. Right? Now, if this was a plot, he'd have to script around the room that I would leave. I would still rough in balloon shapes like I did here, but you know, he would be writing based on what I drew instead of me drawing and having to make sure that I was fitting in a specific amount of room for the copy. So one of the things I had to do as I went through this is I knew that I was not going to have enough room for all that copy. Mm-hmm. And I might still have to reduce these a little bit too, right? Again, these are just sort of thinking. So everything is in play until you are, even when you're penciling it, everything is in play until you start inking it, right? And even then you can change stuff. But this was just a quick idea of how I would be thinking about laying this up. And again, you could do this in any style, right? You could do exactly what I did here, and you could make it like Jack Davis, you could make it like Jack Kirby, you can make it like Alex Ross. You know, again, this part of it doesn't rely particularly on style or finish, but gesture and design and pacing. So
last question, and then we're going to boogie. So Dom asks another really cool question. Mike, do you print out these layouts in pencil traditionally? Do you do a mix of your thumbs and changing your finish sometimes, like pencil, like post-it notes to digital, or maybe printing blue lines, anything like that? Does it matter? Does it change?
Well, if you go and you look at the previous episode, and hold on, I might be able to show something here real quick.
Nice, James. Thank you. And James was referencing Mike's inking demo of Judge Dredd that he posted on YouTube, or Pencil to Pencil YouTube channel. Great work, Mike.
Okay, I'm going to.
Steve, did you say something? I can't hear you all of a sudden.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
I thought I was
Cut my mic.
having, thought I was having a stroke.
Can you guys see this?
Okay.
Yeah. Great.
So this is like 10 years ago. I laid out 4 issues of Lobo, or 3 issues of Lobo Weird World for Jerry Ordway. I did it uncredited. I just did it to help him out. And so what I did is I had that old comic, that Canson comic paper, which is not.
I love fanboy paper. I know you hated that stuff, but I love this for some reason.
Right. So now these were my layouts drawn directly on the board from the script by Paul Levitz. So I drew these right on the board, full size. And then I would send this to Jerry, and he could do his finishes from that. So depending upon, again, that was Paul. That was full script, like we just worked with. Hold on a second. Got another.
This is a perfect opportunity to hit the subscribe button on YouTube right now.
That's right, Steve. I feel like we're in a telethon. Steve, how close are we to 1,000 subs?
Last I saw, we were 15 subscribers away. Like,
we're so close.
Candlestick Makers dozen or something. We'll just come over and do frames for.
Here's some more.
Hold on, I got you.
So this, I was working right on the board, right? And then Jerry could go over and do his finishes from that. So you can work directly right on the board. I would come home from school. I was in school at the time, though. I'd come home. I was still doing my strip, but I would sit down and lay out like a couple pages a night for him. And I did that for a while. I laid out an Aquaman job. I laid out this thing. I laid out a couple issues of Magnus for Bill Reinhold. And I just the Magnus stuff I did smaller, but this stuff for some reason I just drew it right on the board.
Love Magnus Robot Fighter.
Yeah, so it really depends upon the job and what it is that I feel that I have to. What works? I don't. It's like I can draw it right on the board. or I can do little layouts and then blow those up, print them out on my printer, and work on the light box, which is how I did that Darkhawk job, right? Or I can work directly ahead on the board. There's no, I've worked in like so many different ways. It's just whatever works for that particular job, whatever I feel, however I feel I want to do it. That was before I was doing anything on the Cintiq or anything.
Right. Wow.
Beautiful.
Cool.
Well, thank
All
you.
right.
Mike.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike, so much for your heavy lift. I appreciate you. And thank you, dear viewers, for watching Pencil to Pencil, your favorite. As I know you could be anywhere in the world right now, but you spent your
Carmen San Diego.
That's right. You spent your evening with us, and I appreciate you. What would be super helpful for us is if you liked, subscribed, and hit that alert bell to get notified when we go live for the next episode. We're still commiserating about what happens next week. We may or may not be here. I'm not sure yet, but we'll keep you notified, and you'll know if you subscribe. Right?
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
And I think we're a little over time, so we're going to get out of here. Guys, I hope you can share the gospel of Pencil to Pencil with your people. Hey, you know what? Go to the comic book store and go, hey, you know what? Have you guys checked out Pencil to Pencil on YouTube? It's my favorite joint. That's my John. And share this John with your friends, all right?
Share that joint with your friends, right?
That's right. Pass the podcast to the left-hand side. All right, you guys, we're going to get out of here. For my co-host, I'm JAMAR Nicholas. You've been soaking in it, and don't forget, we're still in a pandemic. So make sure, you guys, you wash those curvy hands. Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. That's right. Good job, you guys. We'll see you next time. Bye.